Number 10. Constantly needing background music noise. You tell yourself the music is just for vibes, or that the TV running in the background helps you focus, or that silence feels awkward. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The noise isn't entertainment. It's armor. The moment the sound stops, something else starts. Thoughts you didn't invite, questions you didn't schedule, feelings that don't care whether you're busy or not. Background noise works like a psychological sedative. It keeps the mind occupied just enough to prevent it from wandering inward. Because inward is dangerous territory. That's where unresolved regrets live. That's where old conversations replay with better comebacks. That's where you realize how tired you actually are, or how disconnected, or how unsure you've been pretending not to notice. Silence removes distractions, and without distractions, the mind starts talking loudly. Studies in cognitive psychology show that people who constantly surround themselves with noise report higher discomfort during quiet reflection. Not because silence is harmful, but because it reveals mental clutter that noise normally hides. The brain, when left unstimulated, defaults to self-evaluation, and self-evaluation feels threatening when you're avoiding parts of yourself. So you play music while showering, podcasts while driving short distances, videos while cleaning, even white noise while sleeping. Not to enjoy them, but to make sure there's never a gap where your own thoughts can slip through. Noise becomes a shield against self-awareness, and the irony is brutal. The more noise you need, the more your mind has been trying to say something important. Silence isn't empty, it's confrontational. And when you're always pressing play, what you're really doing is pressing pause on yourself. Number 9. Scrolling late at night to avoid silence. You don't scroll because you're interested. You scroll because stopping feels worse. The lights are off, the world is quiet, and your phone becomes the last barrier between you and yourself. One more reel, one more post, one more refresh, not because it matters, but because silence is waiting the moment you put the phone down. Late night scrolling isn't about boredom, it's about postponement. The day finally ends, responsibilities shut up, and there's nothing left to distract you externally. That's when thoughts usually surface. Doubts about where your life is going, things you didn't say, choices you keep defending but haven't fully accepted. The brain, tired and unfiltered, starts asking honest questions. So you interrupt it with content. Neurological studies show that endless scrolling keeps the brain in a low-effort dopamine loop, just stimulated enough to avoid introspection, but not enough to feel fulfilled. It's mental anesthesia. You're not relaxing, you're numbing. Each swipe delays the moment you'd have to sit with whatever emotions the day buried. That's why scrolling feels strangely urgent at night. You're racing against stillness. You tell yourself you'll stop after 5 minutes, but you don't. Because when the screen goes dark, your thoughts turn on. And they don't autoplay, they confront. Eventually, your eyes burn, your body begs for rest, but you keep going. Not because you're addicted to the phone, but because you're avoiding the quiet truth that shows up when nothing else is talking. Sleep would mean surrender, and surrender would mean listening. So you scroll until exhaustion wins, and tomorrow you wake up tired, blaming the phone, when really it was your own thoughts you were running from. Number 8. Overscheduling to avoid downtime. You call it being productive, ambitious, disciplined. Your calendar is packed, your days are full, and your free time is optimized. But underneath all that structure is something quieter and far more uncomfortable. You don't leave space because space leaves room for thinking, and thinking is what you're avoiding. Overscheduling isn't about loving activity, it's about fearing stillness. When every hour has a task, the mind stays externally focused. There's no gap for reflection, no pause to ask whether you actually like the life you're efficiently maintaining. Movement becomes a distraction disguised as responsibility. Psychologically, constant busyness keeps the brain in task completion mode. Dopamine is released not from joy but from checking things off. That sense of momentum feels safe, because stopping would mean noticing the fatigue you keep outrunning, or realizing that some of your goals were inherited, not chosen, or admitting that productivity has replaced purpose. That's why downtime makes you uneasy. When plans cancel, you feel restless instead of relieved. When there's nothing scheduled, anxiety creeps in. Not because you need more to do, but because without motion, your internal questions catch up. Questions like, is this all I'm doing? Is this who I wanted to become? So you stack commitments, meetings after work, projects on weekends, just staying busy. But busyness is a convenient escape. It lets you feel valuable without being honest. It lets you delay confronting parts of yourself that don't fit neatly into a planner. And the truth most people don't want to face is this. If your life collapses the moment you stop moving, the problem isn't laziness, it's avoidance. Because stillness doesn't steal your peace, it exposes what's missing. Number 7. Sleeping immediately after work to escape reflection. You tell yourself you're exhausted, and maybe you are. But the urgency to sleep the moment work ends isn't always about rest, it's about escape. Sleep becomes a fast-forward button, a way to skip the part of the day where your mind finally gets a voice. The hours after work are dangerous. There's no boss, no tasks, No external pressure telling you what to think about next. That's when the questions start forming. Was today meaningful? Is this routine all there is? Why do I feel empty even though I'm doing fine? Instead of letting those thoughts surface, you shut everything down. Bed, blanket, lights off. End scene. Psychologically, this behavior is linked to avoidance coping. When the brain associates quiet wakefulness with emotional discomfort, it looks for the quickest exit. Sleep becomes emotional anesthesia. Not deep, restorative sleep, but unconsciousness. A way to not be present with yourself. That's why this kind of sleep often feels unsatisfying. You wake up still tired, still heavy, still avoiding something unnamed. Because nothing was processed, only postponed. The mind didn't rest. It hid, and whatever you were running from didn't disappear overnight. It just waited. People who do this consistently report feeling like their lives are on autoplay. Days blur together. Weeks pass without memory. Because reflection is what turns experience into meaning. Without it, life feels fast but empty. So when you collapse into bed immediately after work, ask yourself something uncomfortable. Are you tired? Or are you afraid of being awake with your own thoughts? Because sleep should restore you, not rescue you. And if unconsciousness feels safer than awareness, it's not rest you're chasing. It's relief from yourself. Number 6. Avoiding meditation or journaling. You say meditation isn't for you. Journaling feels cringe. Sitting quietly sounds pointless. But notice what all those practices have in common. They remove distractions and force you to listen, not to the world, to yourself. And that's exactly why you avoid them. Meditation and journaling don't create thoughts, they reveal them. The moment you sit still or put pen to paper, the mind stops performing and starts confessing. Unfinished emotions rise up, contradictions appear. You notice patterns you've been justifying for years, and suddenly, the version of yourself you present to the world doesn't fully match the one in your head. Research shows that mindfulness practices increase emotional clarity, which sounds positive, until you realize clarity means you can no longer pretend you don't feel what you feel. Journaling, in particular, exposes internal loops. When you write the same worries repeatedly, you're forced to confront how stuck you've been. And that's uncomfortable, so you dismiss these practices as boring or unnecessary. You stay busy, you stay stimulated. Because awareness threatens the stories you tell yourself. Stories like, I'm fine, this is normal, or I'll deal with it later. Meditation removes the noise that keeps those lies intact. What most people don't realize is that avoiding introspection doesn't make life easier, it just makes it less honest. The emotions you refuse to sit with don't disappear. They leak out as irritability, restlessness, or numbness. You feel off, but can't explain why. Meditation and journaling feel hard because they don't distract you, they introduce you. And if meeting yourself feels intimidating, it's not because you're broken. It's because there's something inside you that's been waiting to be acknowledged. Silence doesn't harm you. Avoiding it does. Number 5. Always watching something while eating. You don't eat meals anymore. You consume them. One hand scrolling, eyes locked on a screen. Food becoming a background activity. You tell yourself it's just habit, just entertainment. But eating in silence would mean being present. And presence is exactly what you're avoiding. Meals used to be pauses, natural breaks where the mind slowed down and the body checked in. Now, silence during eating feels unbearable. Without a screen, thoughts creep in. You notice your mood, your loneliness, your stress. You realize you're not actually hungry, you're depleted. So you replace awareness with stimulation. Psychologically, pairing food with constant content trains the brain to associate nourishment with distraction. You're not allowed to feel. Just chew, watch, swallow, repeat. Studies show distracted eating reduces emotional regulation and increases dissociation because the mind never gets a moment to land. You're filling space, not hunger. That's why eating alone feels uncomfortable without a video. The screen acts like a social substitute, a mental companion that keeps you from noticing how quiet your inner world has become. Because if you ate without noise, you might realize you're tired of running, or that food has become comfort, not fuel. This habit isn't about multitasking. It's about avoidance. Avoiding the subtle emotions that surface when nothing else is demanding your attention. Avoiding the realization that you don't know how to sit with yourself anymore. When every meal needs a screen, it's not entertainment you're craving. It's escape. And the tragedy is this: the more you distract yourself while eating, the less you taste your food, and the less you taste your own life. Presence isn't boring, it's just unfamiliar. And unfamiliar feels threatening when you've been avoiding yourself for too long. Number 4, talking excessively to fill silence. You call yourself expressive, social, just someone who talks a lot. But pay attention to when the talking spikes. It's not during meaningful exchanges, it's during pauses, awkward gaps, quiet rooms. Moments when nothing is happening. That's when the words start pouring out, faster than you can filter them. Excessive talking is often a defense, not a personality trait. Silence creates space, and space invites awareness. When there's no conversation to manage, your mind turns inward. You start noticing emotions you've been outrunning: insecurity, sadness, uncertainty, boredom that feels heavier than it should. So you fill the air before those thoughts can fully form. Psychologically, this is known as avoidance through verbalization. Talking keeps the brain externally engaged. It prevents introspection by constantly shifting attention outward. That's why some people feel anxious when conversations end. It's not that they need others, it's that they don't want to be alone with themselves. Notice how the talking often isn't deep. It jumps topics. It over-explains. It narrates things that don't need narration. The goal isn't connection, it's noise. Because noise keeps the internal voice quiet, and that internal voice might ask questions you don't want to answer yet. This habit also explains why silence can feel personal, even threatening. When someone doesn't respond immediately, discomfort rises, not because of rejection, but because the silence mirrors the one you avoid internally. You rush to fill it, just like you do in your own head. Talking isn't the problem. Fear of quiet is. Because silence doesn't judge you, it doesn't expose you. It simply reflects what's already there. And if you're afraid of pauses, it's not because they're empty, it's because they're honest. Silence waits, and some people talk endlessly just to make sure they never have to listen. Number 3, drinking or snacking. When alone with thoughts, you're not hungry, you're buffering. The craving shows up the moment you're alone, the moment the room gets quiet, the moment there's nothing pulling your attention outward. So you reach for a drink, a snack, something to occupy your hands and mouth while your mind stays distracted. This isn't about appetite, it's about interruption. Eating or drinking creates a physical task that overrides mental stillness. Chewing, sipping, opening wrappers gives the brain something to do so it doesn't drift inward. Because inward is where emotions start forming sentences, and those sentences aren't always comfortable. Psychologically, this is emotional displacement. Instead of processing thoughts, you soothe them with sensation. Food becomes a regulator, not nourishment. That's why it often happens without awareness. You finish the snack and barely remember tasting it. The goal was never enjoyment, it was escape. Research shows people are more likely to eat mindlessly when experiencing low-level anxiety or rumination. Not panic, not sadness, just quiet unease, the kind that shows up when there's nothing else to focus on. Snacking gives the illusion of control. You can't control your thoughts, but you can control what you consume. This habit explains why eating alone feels different. Without conversation or screens, food becomes a stand-in for comfort, a temporary anchor, something to keep you grounded so you don't have to face what's floating up inside. But here's the part most people miss. Every time you eat to avoid thinking, you teach your brain that thoughts are threats, that silence needs to be medicated. And over time, the discomfort grows because it's never addressed, only delayed. You're not weak for doing this. You're human. But if being alone with your thoughts makes you reach for something to numb them, it's not hunger talking, it's avoidance. And until you sit with what you're trying to swallow down, no amount of snacks will ever actually satisfy you. Number 2, keeping lights on even when unnecessary. You don't need the lights on. You know that? You're not reading, you're not doing anything that requires visibility. Yet the switch stays up, the room glows, because darkness feels heavier than it should. And that discomfort isn't about fear of the dark, it's about what darkness invites. Light is stimulation, darkness is reflection. When the lights are on, your brain stays slightly alert, slightly distracted, anchored to the external world. When they're off, the environment quiets down, and the mind takes a center stage. Thoughts stretch out, emotions feel louder, memories replay with more clarity. So you keep the lights on. Not to see better, but to feel less. Psychologically, humans associate darkness with reduced sensory input. Fewer external cues mean the brain turns inward. For someone comfortable with their inner world, that's peaceful. For someone avoiding it, it's unsettling. Darkness removes visual noise, and without noise, the mind fills the space with whatever has been ignored all day. That's why some people feel uneasy in dim rooms even when they're safe. It's not paranoia, it's exposure. In the dark, distractions lose their power. You become more aware of your breathing, your thoughts, your emotional state. And if you've been suppressing things, stress, sadness, unresolved conflict, they surface more easily. Keeping lights on becomes a subtle form of control. You're pushing back against stillness, against vulnerability, against the quiet honesty that shows up when there's nothing else to look at. Even sleep feels different in darkness because the mind has fewer places to hide. This habit isn't about fear of shadows, it's about fear of introspection. Because when the lights go out, there's nowhere for your thoughts to escape to. And if you're uncomfortable sitting with yourself in the dark, it's not the darkness you're avoiding. It's what it reveals when everything else fades away. Number 1, distracting yourself the moment emotions surface. The second an emotion shows up, you move. You grab your phone, open an app, start cleaning, make a call, do anything. Not because you're busy, but because feeling something without immediately reacting to it feels unbearable. You don't sit with emotions. You intercept them. This reflex is fast, almost invisible. Sadness starts forming. You scroll. Anxiety flickers. You plan something, anger rises, you distract yourself with noise or productivity. The goal isn't to solve the emotion, it's to shut it down before it fully exists. Because once an emotion settles in, it starts asking for attention, and attention leads to understanding, and understanding leads to change. Psychologically, this is emotional avoidance. The brain learns that emotions equal danger, so it deploys distractions like emergency exits. Over time, you stop trusting your own inner signals. Instead of processing emotions, you outrun them. And anything you outrun doesn't disappear. It chases you quietly. That's why emotions later come back stronger, often at inconvenient times. In bed, in the shower, in moments of stillness you didn't plan for. Because emotions aren't problems to fix, they're information. When you constantly mute them, you lose access to what your mind is trying to tell you. This habit also explains emotional numbness. If you distract yourself from discomfort long enough, you also dull joy. The brain doesn't selectively suppress feelings. It lowers the volume on all of them. Life starts feeling flat, distant, strangely unreal. Distracting yourself isn't weakness. It's self-protection learned too well. But the truth is simple and uncomfortable. Emotions don't need immediate action. They need presence. And the moment you stop running from them, they lose their threat. You're not afraid of emotions because they're too intense. You're afraid because they slow you down enough to make you honest. And honesty changes things. That's why distraction feels safe. But safety isn't the same as peace. Peace comes when you finally let yourself feel without reaching for the escape hatch.